Hope you're doing well. It is 1:42 a.m. right now. It's been a long day, but I promise that I will get you the video too for the DOM series that I'm creating for you. So here it is. Let's dive right into it. Um, just today, what we're gonna cover is how these, um, how the as I mentioned before, DOM is full of JavaScript objects, and we're gonna see how these JavaScript objects look more visually. And we're also gonna talk about something called prototype and proto, which is on next video, because it is really important to know how these DOM JavaScript objects are created and who they inherit from and who their parents are and so on. And so let's dive right in. To recap, when the browser receives HTML and it parses HTML, it creates a document called DOM. And DOM is just browser's interpretation of what HTML is. It's what it understands. So basically, it reads all these forms, it does a tags, and then it turns it into a JavaScript object, which is just the hash. And that's basically what DOM is filled up with, just JavaScript objects, all bundled up in a hierarchy tree, like what HTML looks like, right? If HTML has div, and then it has a form, and it has another div, basically this is a tree, right? Because on the top level there's a div, and then there's two children, form and div, and those are two siblings, and maybe inside of div there's another div. And this is basically a tree where a div is inside of a div, and then this div has two siblings, and this outer div has two children. And that's basically a tree, and all the JavaScript object in the DOM, which represents this HTML tags, is also organized in a tree, which I explained before. So, and once DOM is created for all these JavaScript objects that represents these HTML tags, then your JavaScript code can be run. And your JavaScript, we could conclude now that your JavaScript code does not interact with HTML tags or HTML files. It deals with DOM, document objects. And it makes sense because DOM is filled up with JavaScript objects, and your JavaScript code is dealing with JavaScript objects. So HTML file, from browser's perspective, is received to create DOM. And we're gonna look at what these JavaScript objects look like. So when you open up inspect here, and let's look at the h1 tag. Okay, so when you click properties here, we'll just forget about all of these. Let's first look at h1 Coolio CTA pitch. And remember, this Coolio CTA pitch, ID is Coolio, and class is CTA pitch. What is all this, right? What is all this? Well, we're gonna come right back in here, okay? So if I do copy element, remember what we saw down here. So we have an HTML, right? This is HTML file. Now I'm gonna be the browser, and I'm gonna create DOM out of this h1. And remember, in DOM, everything is JavaScript object. So here we are. Now, let's see. Let me go look down here. Let me see something cool properties here. Oh, there's class name called, there's property called class name with CTA pitch, which corresponds to this h1 HTML CTA pitch class. So I'm gonna put that right here. Oh, there's ID Coolio. I'm gonna put that right there. Inner HTML. Nah, let's do inner text. That's more intuitive. There you go. Locale name or node name. There you go. Now look at that. DOM. In DOM, everything JavaScript object, and we just created JavaScript object representation of this HTML tag h1. This h1 tag has a class CTA pitch, an ID Coolio, and tag see what's next. This JavaScript object should also hold that information, right? Because it is representing this HTML tag called h1 with the class CTA pitch. So this object does have that information. Class name, ID Coolio, inner tag, see what's next, node name, which is h1 tag. And what if I name this the same as this? All right, ta-da, that's it. I mean, obviously you can't really do this in JavaScript. It has to be more like maybe, something like this or camel case, but you get the idea. Yeah, and that's basically what it is. This is browser showing you the DOM version, which is JavaScript object version of this HTML tag h1. So when you do something like this, document query selector, as I mentioned above, all DOM, which is just JavaScript object of this HTML file, could be accessible and is housed under an object called document. Document is just an object, right? And it has a method called query selector. And you could get all the HTML tags inside of this document interface or on this method. And if you call query selector CTA pitch, do you think it's gonna give us an HTML tag or this object? Well, let's find out. And it is kind of weird because it gives us this HTML tag, right? But really it's just trying to give us a more visually understandable visual, which is this HTML tag. But really what we're getting back is this object. That is why if I do something like house it under h1, right? And now I got CTA pitch, which query CTA pitch. So it knows what this class CTA pitch is from the HTML file, and it gets this JavaScript object representation, DOM object representation of that HTML tag, which is this object. And if I get that object back, I could run any of these properties, right? So I got h1. Well, let's go back to the elements and see. This is the JavaScript object version of this h1 tag. There's base URI property. Ta-da! There we go. It's the same as that. And then if I do something like inner HTML, h1 inner HTML, that comes out, which is the same. And if I do namespace URI, that comes out. So basically, when you are occurring, which you have done it many times before, right? Get element by ID. And let's get Coolio. And get Coolio, right? Which is this h1. But really, you're getting this DOM JavaScript object, right? And you could call any of these methods. Any of these methods. That's all it is. That's all it is. h1 tag is converted to this JavaScript object, and you could get them by querying this document interface. Now, what does prototype has to do with this? Well, I want to explain what this is all about, what all these rest of things are. But before that, we need to understand what prototype is. As you know Ruby, you know object-oriented language. Um, how do you create an instance, right? You call new something, and you get an instance. Well, how do you define methods in instance? Well, you define it like this, and then you could call instance something. I know you know this, but how do we do it in JavaScript? As you know, in JavaScript, all classes are basically constructors, which constructs instance. So what creates instance in JavaScript? It's functions. So if I create function, and if I do new something of this function, I will get an instance. But how can we call a method called maybe something? I don't know, because we never defined it. I mean, I could do something like hi, and then instance something, and that will return hi. But if I create another instance 2, and if I do something, nothing's gonna return because you have to do it again. But how do I make this global just like here? Because we define this instance method inside class something, so any instance we create here will have that method. Well, in JavaScript, we have something called prototype. And prototype is just an object. That's all it is. And this prototype is given to every single constructor in JavaScript. And every single constructor, what is constructor? It is a function, because constructors create constructs instances, right? And these constructors have something called prototype. And when you type it, what happens? Like, let me create a function. And if I do something prototype, I get this object with these two properties. Don't forget about proto for now. Constructor. What is that? So you get this object. Prototype is just an object. And you get constructor, and it just points to itself. Function something right here. Right? This is all it is. It puts this function something inside of this constructor property, saying that this prototype object right here, which I got by typing prototype on function something, belongs to this function. It's basically saying this object you're seeing right now belongs to this function, which you got it because you called prototype on that function. So constructor is this function something, saying, this is basically saying this function is owner of me. That's all basically it's saying. And if I define some methods here, method 1, hi there, or method 2, hello there. You see this? You see this? I define these two properties, two different attributes inside of this object, which is obtained from calling prototype on function something. And if I do that, then this instance right here, created from this constructor something, could call method 1, and it'll output hi there. And this instance could also call method 2, and it will output this hello there. And if I create another instance, right, and this instance 2 could also call method 1, and it could also call method 2. Why is that? Because every time you create an instance all these instances of the same constructor goes and looks at this its own constructor's prototype object, and right here, and the method is defined. So basically, let me tell you in perspective of this instance, right? Let's call this instance Tobi. That's you, okay? Tobi, right? Tobi is created from calling this constructor called function something. And if I do Tobi method 1, and I say call this method 1 on Tobi, and this method, and Tobi doesn't know where method 1 is. So it goes, who is my constructor? Tobi goes, who is my constructor? Who is my creator? Well, the answer is function something. And then Tobi goes, well, let me see my constructor's prototype, because prototype is where it is an area where all instance methods is defined. All right, well, this right here, this prototype object, right, which is something's prototype, which is its own constructor's prototype, is given, and it sees method 1 and method 2, and now it knows what to output. But here it is. Where does Tobi go and ask, who is my constructor and my creator? And how does it even get to its constructor's prototype in the first place? Well, let's find out. Right here, something's prototype, right? So I'm gonna define these two methods. Hi there. Another two. Hello there. Now, this constructor function's prototype object has method 1, hi there, and method 2, hello there, right? And now our hypothesis is that once we create an instance of this constructor something function, it should be able to go find method 1 and method 2. So if I create an instance called Tobi from this constructor function, Tobi should be able to access method 1, which it does, method 2, which it does. And I'm telling you that it knows how to go get it, because it goes, Tobi goes, who is my constructor? And that's function something, right? Because function something created Tobi. And it goes, let me look at my constructor's prototype object, which is right here, this object right here. And it goes, let me see if there is method 1 and method 2. Oh, yes, there is. Yes, there is. But you see how there isn't a method called method 3? So, well, there isn't, so it goes undefined. But how is it able to go to its own constructor something's prototype? How does it go look it up? I mean, somebody needs to show the way, right? Well, let me show you. When you enter Tobi, which is an object, right? It has a proto, property called proto. So let's go back here. Let's start back here. Okay, right here. When you create an instance from a function, you get Tobi is basically an object, and it gets this property. It's just given a property when it's created. And what is this proto? Proto points to, I'm just gonna hard code it, points to Tobi's constructor's prototype object. Now let's take this in. When you create an instance from a constructor in JavaScript, it automatically comes with this property called underscore underscore proto underscore underscore. And this, what is inside of this property? It is Tobi's, or this instances that was just created, constructors prototype object. So who is Tobi's constructor? It's function something. And what is the prototype object? Well, right here, right? And so if I copy this and put it under here, now that is the real deal. When you create an instance from JavaScript function, which is a constructor, automatically comes with this property called proto, and inside it's an object, and this object is given from its constructor's prototype. It is the same as its constructor's prototype. So it basically says, so basically this proto, you just have to know that points to instances constructor's prototype object. And so, and this constructor's prototype is basically constructor's object where constructor function defines all the instance methods for its future instances, right? And these future instance, when created, automatically gets a property called proto, and this proto property points to its constructor's prototype object. And this prototype object is where constructor function defines all the instance methods. Therefore, instance is able to receive all instance methods from its constructor's prototype object, right? So this instance right here, Tobi, automatically gets proto once created, and it's basically this mapping. It's like this direction. It directs you to this constructor's prototype object, which is where constructor function defines all the instance method. So that's where it goes and looks at all the methods that's given to Tobi. Tobi goes, aha, I'm gonna travel to proto, and I'm able to find my constructor functions, my creators instance method that was made for me, and it looks at method 1 equals method 2, or was, oh, these are for me. And so Tobi is able to call method 1, and Tobi is able to call method 2. And that's what it is. And this is very, very important, because what if, well, let's test it out, right here. You see Tobi right here, it has proto. Well, look at that. Method 1 and method 2. And this is constructor, which I explained before. Constructor means the owner of this prototype object. So it's basically saying this object right here, if it has a constructor, then it is a prototype of this function something. And so if I do function somethings prototype, that's what it looks like. Method 1, method 2, constructor function something, because it is this prototype. And if I do Tobi proto, It is the same as this constructor's prototype. And that's all it is. Every instance gets a proto. Proto is not meant for constructors. Constructors gets prototype object because this is an area where you could define its instance methods for its instances. But its instances, every instance needs a way to go look up a method that's given to them, and it does it through this proto because it directly links to its parents or its constructor's prototype object, which is a place where all the instance methods are defined. So through this proto, it goes finds method 1 and 2. So it's very, very important, very, very important that instances do not get prototype object. Why? Because they're not constructors. Why would they? They're not gonna be able. You can create instance with Tobi because that's an instance. So if a prototype object is where you define all the instance methods, why should Tobi get prototype property? No, instead it needs a method that will go get its constructor's prototype object. So that's why instance get proto, constructors get prototype. You need to remember that. But what is this? Do you see how constructor prototype has right here this proto? But I just said instances get proto, right? Why is proto existing on constructor functions prototype object? Well, let's think about what proto does again. What proto does is it lets you go look at your constructor's instance method that was given to you. But if a constructor also has a constructor's prototype also has proto, this is called inheritance chain. Meaning, what if I have something like this? What if I have function something? But before that, I have function another, right? And then in this function another, it's prototype, I define, well, first of all, I have to say constructor, right? Because constructor basically says, who is this prototype object for or belong to? That's what constructor is, property is. And we do function another, we put that. And in here, we're going to define another method 1. Hi there, right? And I want this function something to have all of the instance methods defined in this function another's prototype, so that when I call new something and I get an instance, I want to call another method 1 and it will do hi there. How do we do that? How do we do that? Well, we know that function something has prototype object. And remember, constructor property basically means who does this prototype object belong to, which is function something. So it points to itself. And then if we want our instance of function something to access function another's prototype methods, which means this function another's prototype is for instances of another. But what if I want some other function to some other functions instances to inherit another function another's instance methods? Well, then you put it under proto. I remember proto points to prototype object. And this proto, we're gonna put this function on other prototypes right here. I'm gonna put it here. Do you see this? Do you see this? Isn't this beautiful? Look at this. Function something's prototype object, which defines its instance methods, also has a proto property, which points to a prototype. And this prototype object is function another prototype object, and it has another method one defined. So if I create an instance from this function something, and if I call another method one, basically what happens is this instance automatically is born with the proto, which points to its constructor's prototype object, and which is right here. It's who is this constructor, which is function something, right here, and its prototype object is this. So it's born with this. And so when instance calls another method one, it goes looks at its proto, and then it's not here, so it goes looks at its another proto, and it finds another method one, and it's able to output hi there. That's all there it is. So let's give that a try. Remember, try to do these exercises yourself and write it down yourself, and re-listen to it, and then retry it, and then it'll make sense. And repetition really works. Right here, spaced repetition is the key to memorization. You review it again later, and again even later. This is my favorite quote because it's beautiful. That's how it is. Alright, so I'm gonna create a function, another, and there's a prototype object of this function, right? Which is basically empty, it has nothing. And I'm gonna call another method. I'm gonna put another method one. This is from function another, right? So now another prototype has this another method one. Now I'm gonna call create function something. Now something has prototype. There's no methods in there. But if I do something and prototype, remember, proto, if I set it to function another's prototype, now something, if I do this, something, function something's prototype looks like this. Did I do that wrong? No, I didn't. Okay, so this prototype constructor, remember, a constructor basically says who is this prototype belongs to, which is function something. So that's good. This means this prototype you're seeing right now belongs to this function something, and it has a proto which points to a prototype. At this point, if a prototype has a proto, then it's inheritance from another function. If an instance has proto, then it is, we could think of it as it's also an inheritance, but it points to its constructor, its creator's prototype. Either way, proto always points to prototype object. And this happens so that function something's prototype object's proto points to a prototype object, but whose function another's, right here, prototype object, and it has another method one. So now if I create an instance from function something, it's proto underscore proto will point to function something's prototype, which has all of this. which also includes function on others prototype object through proto inside of function something's prototype object. So if I create new something, which is an instance, and if I do instance, you see it has a proto. It's always, every instance is born with proto property, which points to its constructors prototype object right here, and it's right here, and it's the same thing as its constructor prototype, right? It's the same thing if you look closely. Instance proto, and it's the same thing right here. It points to its parents, its constructor's prototype object. And if I look at the instance proto's prototype, which is its constructor's prototypes, proto, then you're able to see that this is prototype of function another, which is another method 1. So if I do instance another method 1, you get this is from function another. Even though function something does not have that method, but because its proto points to function another's prototype, which has another method 1, it is also passed down all the way down to its instance. And this instance is able to do inheritance lookup through proto to a prototype object. And through this prototype object's proto, you could get to another prototype object. This is from the instance all the way up to its constructor something. And function is constructor's prototype's proto property is able to get to function another's prototype object. And that is how inheritance lookup works in JavaScript. Please do this exercise on your own, and please ask me questions, which I'm sure you will. And this is very confusing. If you don't get it, just keep practicing, and you'll definitely get it. All right.